Hi everybody, how's it going? I'm doing great here in the south. I'm in the middle of an ice storm, so I'm trying to get this video uploaded before the power lines go down because of the ice storm. But it's already snowed some, so in North Carolina we almost never get snow, so I'm really loving it. And this quilt block this month was block 8, called Right as Rain. When I first got this in the mail, and I was all excited to open it, and I opened it, and when I looked at it, I thought, wow, that block looks really depressing. And then I read the name, and it said Right as Rain, and I thought, well, that's pretty fitting, because yeah, the rain can be kind of gloomy and cloudy, and that's what I thought of this block. So there's been a couple different months when I wanted to change the block, but I felt like if I'm doing a tutorial, I kind of have to follow the pattern, because that's sort of the point of a tutorial. But this month, I just could not help myself. I didn't want a depressed block, so I changed mine. And the only thing I did is these corners up here and this in the middle, I substituted from some of the previous months' leftover fabric that I had for this orange. And personally, I definitely like my block better. It just livens it up, and I was happy with my changes. But as far as the piecing process, there was nothing different. Just substituted that orange fabric for this other fabric. This block 8 is the same as block 2. So if you want to save your fabric from this one, or wait, I'm doing it backwards, from this one, and go back and get some out of your stash, I was able to use all of my old stash for everything except for one of the prints, and I don't remember now which one it was. So yeah, 3 out of my 4 I didn't even have to touch out of this month's stash. And we have a lot of tips and tricks for this month to share with you. There were definitely some things different about this month. So let's get started. The first step in assembling this block of the month says draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of the fabric A-squares. So I'd had this tip in a previous video, but just in case you didn't watch that one, I'll say it again here. I find it very helpful in drawing the diagonal lines if you actually put your square on the diagonal like I've done in both of these, and line them up with a line. That way you know you have it straight. And then you set your template right along the line, but I'll kind of zoom in so you can see. You actually put your template just a smidge to the left of the line, because when you go to draw your pen or whatever you use, it actually takes up a little bit of room. So that it'll actually be straight, it needs to be a smidge over to accommodate for the space of that pen. One more thing is that when you're doing the triangles on point like this, they have a tendency to want to fray if you do it how you normally would and start at the top and go down. So a way you can prevent that is if you just come in a little bit and go out, and then do the same thing at the bottom, come in a little bit and go down, and then just connect them sort of from here to here, and that will keep those points from fraying. One thing to keep in mind as you're sewing these pieces, when you're stacking a piece and stacking a piece and stacking a piece, is that as you're sewing, say for example, this is, my 1/4 inch line where I should be sewing. For all of these pieces, you want to sew scanter, that means smaller this way than you do on the line, or bigger this way. And the reason you want to do a more scant line is because when you do seam on seam on seam, they tend to take up a little bit more room and bulk up a little bit more, which makes your piece shrink. And if you sew more scant, smaller, then either one or two things will happen with your piece. Either it will be the correct size, and that's great, or it will be a little bit big and you can just trim it down. But it's a lot easier for it to be just right or to have to trim it down a teeny bit than it is if you sew on the lines or a smidge to the right and your piece will end up too small. And once your piece is too small, it's much harder to try to fix it and work it in than if you just do it a teeny bit bigger in the first place, and then you can just cut it down to be the correct size. So I have just a little reminder of normally when I start chain piecing, I start out by just feeding the scrap piece of fabric through, and then I start on my regular fabric. And the reason I do that is because if I forget, a lot of times, especially when I'm doing a diagonal corner, you can see how my corner kind of got chewed up in the feed dogs in the machine and got eaten up. So now I have to fix that. And if you just feed your scrap piece through in the first place and then start chain piecing, then if that happens, it would be on the scrap and not your end. And when you do go to fix your mistake, if your corner gets chewed up, do not feed it through the way you did in the first place. All you have to do is turn it around and feed it through, you know, where you've already sewed, kind of started up there, and then go through the point, and then you won't chew it up any worse than it already is in your corner. So once you've used your scant seam allowance to make your 3.5 inch blocks, this is when you need to go in and square up the blocks. So they're supposed to measure 3.5 inches. So I use my ruler that has this line on it. And on your side, you don't want to be directly on an edge. You want to be in a little bit on all sides. You want a little extra over here, a little extra over here, and here and here. And the reason for that is because no matter how hard you try to sew, like you can see right here, there's only a teeny bit of green at this side, but there's a bunch more at this side, and there's more at this side and less at this side, and less of the white at that side and more of the white at the other. So when you have just a little bit outside of all your edges, then that allows you to get your block nice and symmetrical, so that when you go to add your next step, you'll be starting off with a perfectly shaped and sized piece. Once you get your half square triangle units cut to the correct size, 3.5 inches, I would just recommend just running the iron over them really quick, just to kind of help reset those seams now that you've trimmed the edges off, because the thread will be more likely to want to pull away from those edges now that you've trimmed the sides off. So that just kind of helps reset them and keep them from coming loose. When you get to this step in the directions, it can definitely be a little bit of confusing, because if you look at the diagram, it looks like when you have your square E down, then your J square should fit right in each corner. Then your other two will fit right in each corner, and everything fits neatly. And when you really go to do it in real life, that is not accurate, and it does not look like that. Mine aren't quite straight. I just was sitting there for the picture, but you can see how they overlap here. And when I go to put my other two on, which I haven't actually sewn yet, but just pretend I did, if we go to put, that's not the right way, go to put my other two on, it'll overlap even more. And the reason for that is once you fold them back, like the directions tell you, they'll kind of look like they have flying geese units on all 4 sides. And once you sew these to the blocks, or the pieces that go on the top and bottom and left and right, this connecting fabric will be eaten up in your seam allowance, so you'll just have the square showing like it shows in the picture. But for the time that you're assembling it, what you really have does not match the picture. Don't worry about that. Just keep going, and it will work out once you do it. So here is the finished center square that measures the 3.5 inches, and you can see that it does look very different from the picture, as I said it would. But this will work out fine once you sew it up. These seams right here and here, and all along it, are what will be disappearing the seam allowance, and then your square will be on the edge, just like it shows in the picture. So here is a good example of when the scant 1/4 inch, how it is very important. So this flying geese unit started out 6.5 inches long. And if I turn it over and I use my ruler, you can see that the 1/4 inch, it's kind of hard on camera, but this line right here where that line is a 1/4 inch. So if I zoom in, you can see that when I put that line on the line I sewed, it's just the teeniest smidge smaller than a 1/4 inch, but just barely a teeny bit smaller than the 1/4 inch. So when I turn my piece back over, if this piece started out 6.5 inches and I took up a 1/4 inch, then it should now be 6 1/4 inches. And when I put my ruler on there to measure it, it's hard to get it to show up on the camera, but if you come here, this line right here, this solid line that goes vertically, 6 1/4 inches that this flying geese unit should be, and you can see that it's too small. So if I sew the other side of this just like this, my block will end up 1/4 of an inch too small. So even though I had tried to do a scant 1/4 inch on this one, I still was way too close to 1/4 inch. I need to make it smaller, because when I turn this over, this seam took up all that space. That's almost 1/8 of an inch. So I need to rip that out and do a much scanter 1/4 inch seam allowance, so that when I turn it over, then this flying geese unit will measure 6 1/4 inches. And that way when my finished block is done, it will be the 12.5 inches square it's supposed to be, and not 12 1/4. When assembling the center star unit with the flying geese on each side, because you need this point and this point and this point and this point to align, this is one of the times where I would recommend increasing your stitch length, just kind of sewing about 1 inch right along there, and then once you've sewn it, turn it over, see if it's good. When your points are aligned and it's good, then put your stitch length back to normal, and then just sew the whole seam. And that'll save you some work if you have issues getting those points to align nicely. So I'm very happy with how my block turned out this month, and thank you so much for joining me. Hope to see you next month.